Hello, and welcome back to the Worcester Senior Center Stay Connected programming on Channel 192. My name is Suki Lapin, and I am the program coordinator at the Worcester Senior Center. Today, we will experience the beauty and wonder of the historic Wang Theater live in your home through a virtual tour. We will go behind the scenes of one of Boston's most prominent landmarks. The Boch Center is opening its doors digitally with new virtual tours of the historic Wang Theater. You will go behind the scenes and see hallways walked by entertainers like Bruce Springsteen, Ella Fitzgerald, Mikhail Gorbachev, Queen, Elton John, Lady Gaga, Liza Minnelli, and more. Each tour is led by a trained guide that will take you through the building and backstage and answer questions about its unique history. From its roots as a hotel and glamorous days as a movie cathedral to today's role as an impressive venue for performance and events. Now, please welcome our tour guide, Scott Towers.
Excellent. Thank you for the introduction. So you should just be seeing myself and my second camera. Welcome. My name is Scott. I am the manager of tours here. For all intents and purposes, I like to call myself the historian here at the Wang Theater. I have two cameras set up that we're going to move around from location to location. One is pointed right up above me at the beautiful artwork that you'll see. The other is of my wonderful face. But I'll take you all around, share some photos, some stories of the history of this beautiful theater. If you have any questions whatsoever, please ask as we're going. But welcome. And to start off, we'll go with some very early history. Now, the building opened all the way back in the 1920s. Initially, it was designed to be a hotel, and you'll kind of get that feeling as we move around. They designed it as the Capitol Hotel and office building, but it never officially opened as that. They ran out of money very early on in the project. Paramount Pictures came along and they decided to turn it into a movie theater. They used the plans and the blueprints from the hotel. One thing that I will add, because I just noticed myself freeze a little bit, there might be times where I freeze or skip as we move around, but I try to stay away from some of those areas. But if I do freeze, bear with me, I'll be right back. Paramount Pictures used the blueprints from the hotel to build one of the biggest movie theaters in the world. It opened October 16th, 1925. It was over 150 feet tall, one of the tallest buildings in Boston when it first opened. And it was just a huge success very early on. One of the very first pictures that I'm going to show you here is the local newspaper, the Boston Globe. On October 16th, we actually had a private event for local celebrities, politicians, people within the movie industry. But you'll see right here, it says, we made the front page headlines the next day, Boston's new theater, architectural marvel, metropolitan last word in size, beauty, and convenience, 20,000 storm entrances at private opening. So there were over 20,000 people that went to the very first event here. There was probably only a few thousand invited guests, but there were over 20,000 people waiting outside those doors to see this brand new space. And at that point, they knew they had a success. The very first opening day to the public was the next day, October 17th, and they really tried to accommodate as many people as possible. There was only around 5,000 seats in the theater, but they would sell anywhere from 10 to 20,000 tickets. You'll see this picture here on the right has the sign up front, open October 17th, 5,000 seats. You can see all the outfits. You think of when it was fashionable to go out to the theater, you get dressed up, all the men in their hats there, the women in their hats as well. But there was just a lot of excitement in and around this building. It was one of the last theaters constructed in the theater district in Boston. The oldest that still exists today is the Colonial Theater, opened its doors in 1900. And by the time this space opened as the Metropolitan Theater, there were over 20 or 30 other theaters within our district. And you can see on the left, many of those that were open at the time, the Scully Square, Waldron's Casino, the Gaiety, Olympia, BF Keith's is now my apologies. BF Keith's is now the Opera House. Thank you. The Schubert is still around. That's actually a part of our organization across the street, but there are not as many theaters as there once was. Sadly, not as many lasted the test of time like we were able to. One of the big things that they did was they were really heavy on advertisements, and they would put ads in all the local papers and pitch this place as much as they could. It was more than just a movie theater. You'll see in these diagrams here, there was a lot of space. You'll even see that it says here, Capitol Theater and Office Building. So they used those blueprints and plans from the hotel for the Capitol Hotel, just changed the name of the Capitol Theater, but they never actually opened it as the Capitol Theater. It opened as the Metropolitan. That was just kind of their code name of sorts as they were starting to plan and build out the space. They wanted to accommodate as many people as possible. So they would sell 10 to 20,000 tickets. Tickets were around 35 cents each. If you weren't in the theater watching whatever show was on the stage or the screen, there'd be an entire day of activities. There'd be movies. These are what the playbills looked like at the time, just kind of almost a loose leaf paper. So you'd get that when you came in. On the cover would be the premiere film later that night, and they were all silent films at the time. And then there'd be an overture every single day from our on-site orchestra. We had a chorus, a ballet. There were cartoons, there was news, there were all sorts of different activities going on the screen, on the stage, and even in the lobbies. So if you weren't watching what was in the auditorium, there might be live music being played in the lobby. There was music, there was dancing, there was ping pong and billiard games in the club levels. There were card games going on in some of our lobbies, all sorts of activities to make this really a full day of entertainment. And this is just kind of a look at the marquee and how it evolved over time. So the top picture here is very early in the history. It's our 4th birthday, so that would have been very late in the 1920s. By the bottom there is as it started to look in the 1930s. And by that point in time, people referred to it as the Met or the M&P. It started to get that classic movie theater look that you have. Into the 30s, we had to evolve. We had to change. Silent films weren't as popular anymore. So we started to do less of the vaudeville style silent film era productions, and we started to do just more movies. Eventually, they started to do more music and have swing bands in. Here's an image from the 1940s. We have our street, just to, if it's been a while since you've been to Boston, get you acclimated to the area. So on the right is our theater. You can see how big it is compared to everything else. The first 5 floors are the theater today. And then the remaining 9 floors above us, because it's 14 total, was all office space and a number of different spaces above us. Today, it's actually all part of Tufts Medical Center. There's that old adage where you say, oh, someone's injured. Is there a doctor in the house? I like to say 9 times out of 10, there's always going to be a doctor here because they're right above us. I don't think you see many theaters that have a hospital above them. But next door to us is the Wilbur Theater. Across from us is the Schubert Theater, the Majestic also down the street. And otherwise, in the horizon back there, that's Boston Common, Boston Public Garden. The street hasn't really changed in the past 100 or so years. Some of the buildings have, but you can even still see that old ad for Union Savings Bank on that building on the right in the back there. So there are still remnants from this time frame. This is just a picture outside from the 1950s. As I said before, a lot of people started to refer to it as the Met. And then side-by-side comparison of what it looked like then and what it looks like now. The building itself has changed names to the Wang Theater. It's changed names a few times, and we'll probably talk about that a little bit. And this is just another image of where we are right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to turn my camera off, and we're going to take a walk into the grand lobby. So you'll be able to see up above all of the beautiful art and architecture and design that went in. And then I'll tell you about that as we get into the grand lobby. But you can see all of the gold, all of the silver. That is real gold and silver. It's pressed on by hand. Chandeliers. The ceiling in this early entry lobby and foyer space was made to be just a little lower, so that when you first walk into the grand lobby, you're blown away by the size, the detail. The two chandeliers are original to the building. All of the art is said to have been done by European artists, painters from Italy that came in. The lead painter, his name was Louis Amorosi. They called him the ex-Vatican painter. And the architecture was done by a gentleman named Clarence Blackall. And Blackall was really the go-to guy for architecture, especially theater architecture at the time. He designed hundreds of buildings, many of which still exist. He designed some of the first steel frame buildings in Boston. The Wilbur next door to us, he designed. The Colonial that I talked about also still exists, he designed. They had a budget, or at least they spent, I don't know if they went over budget, but they spent around $8.5 million to fully build this space as you see it. And today that's around $150 million. 14-story building, gold, all these designs. It was really done to almost transport you to Europe, make you feel like you weren't in Boston anymore and you were in this theater that has been compared to the Palace of Versailles and the Garnier Opera in Paris. And it really was a successful first few decades. Like I said, they started to evolve. They started to change things a bit. By the 1960s, a new company came along, Saks Theaters, and they wanted to change the name from the Metropolitan to the Music Hall. They wanted this to be the place for music in Boston. There was still movies. In this picture here, you'll see we had a James Bond film on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Next door to us at the Wilbur, we had the very controversial show Hair that had been postponed a couple different times. But they did a lot of different things here. They really wanted to focus on music. They had socialite Zsa Zsa Gabor come. She spoke to an audience. They closed off the street, and they were really celebrating the grand opening of this new theater in 1962, the Music Hall. Really just a complete rebrand. They put a blue carpet down the middle. They put even a fountain in the middle of the lobby, and the fountain had fish in it at one point in time. The fish didn't live very long. The fountain didn't last very long. But at least we have a couple pictures from that time period to show that it was there. And these are just some examples of some of the performances and programs and shows they had. Doobie Brothers. Bruce Springsteen practically started his career on his stage. Some big Bruce Springsteen fans feel that one of his best performances ever in his entire career was here on our stage. The Boston Ballet also started right here on our stage during that time. And these photos are all done by the same art photographer. His name is Ron Pinnell. He's taken more photos of more artists than anyone else in the history of our building. And so all of these images are of shows on our stage during this time in the 60s and 70s when we were known as the Boston Music Hall. And it was successful. It was a venture that worked out very well, had a lot of really amazing acts that were here during that time. This is Neil Young. And here's Neil Young's most recent performance in 2018. He's actually been here many, many times, 4 or 5, 6, maybe different times here. So that's one great thing is we have artists that come back every single year. Some might even be able to sell 10, 20,000 seats in an arena, but they choose to keep coming back to our theater because it's intimate, because it's gorgeous, and it's an experience you can't have in other places. The problem, though, during this time in the 60s and 70s was no one was really coming anymore to look at all the beautiful art and architecture, and they stopped really with the upkeep. We had statues losing noses, heads, holes in the wall. The paintings turned black with decades of smoke in the building. It was a very challenging time. Now, unfortunately today, not as many people can remember why it became the Wang Theater. But the significance of the name Wang is extreme. There might even be examples of it in Worcester, but there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Wang, or An Wang, and he came from Boston. He came to Boston from China in the 1950s, and he started his own company after getting his PhD. And he pretty much invented computers. Most people today, they know Steve Jobs, they know Bill Gates, but not as many know Wang. And he was one of the fathers of computers. He invented word processing. He invented magnetic memory. He had over 100 different patents, many of which still are in use today in computers. And he was really the savior of this space. There's a lot of buildings in Boston that bear his name because of his contributions. In the 80s, he was one of the wealthiest people in the world. Things got so bad here in the 80s that in 1982, they actually had to close down the theater for an entire year. There was a 10-foot support beam in the ceiling that collapsed hours before a show was supposed to take place. Fortunately, nobody was injured, but we couldn't do a show with a big piece missing from the ceiling. So they closed, and outside of COVID, that's really the only other time in our history that the theater has been closed for an extended period of time. And that's where Dr. Wang came in, multi-millionaire and extremely philanthropic. He donated $4 million towards the restoration of this theater. $1 million was to fix what needed to be fixed in order to reopen. And $3 million was a challenge to bring the place back to its former glory. Do everything that you could do to restore this space and make it what it was in the 1920s. So throughout the 1980s, teams got hard at work, raising additional funding, bringing in new and inventive performances. And by the 90s, we had raised close to $10 million to fully restore the space to what you see today, what you would have seen when you first walked through the doors in the 1920s. And sadly, Dr. Wang passed away by then. Never got to see what this place became, but we became the place for Broadway. All the big Broadway shows, Les Miserables, Phantom of the Opera, Miss Saigon, they all came through our doors onto our stage. We still do a significant amount of Broadway today, but we also are a nonprofit organization. And so our goal is to really enhance the arts in this area, use our role to enhance the arts education of local students. And so a lot of the funding that we receive goes back into our educational programs, whether it's in school, on site here at the building, a number of different things that we do. So because of that, we do not just Broadway, but we do a lot of ballet, we do music, we have podcasts, we have all sorts of different performances. A lot of international and Latin music comes through here. But this is really a place where anybody who has an interest in the arts can come and have an amazing experience. Seating today is around 3,500 seats. So it's gone down a bit from the original 5,000, but it is still one of the biggest in the US. It's in the top 20 as far as size in the US. And we still continue to be a leader of nonprofit performing arts spaces across the country with all the different programming that we do. But I know I've talked a lot so far. What I'm going to do from here is I'm going to go downstairs to our lower lobby and talk about some of the initiatives we're working on to keep moving forward in the future. If there are any questions, though, so far, I'm happy to answer them. But just bear with me as we take a little walk downstairs. So I right now am in our lower lobby, which today, if you ever came to a performance, most often the main reason people come down here is to use the bathroom. But back in the 20s, this was almost a nightclub of sorts. It was called the Platinum Salon. There'd be, as you can see in this picture, a number of staff members that would line up at the soda fountain. They do a choreographed routine, bring people their food, their drinks. This was during Prohibition, so there was no illegal consumption of alcohol or anything like that. But it was a place for people to come. Think of the last time you were at a performance, and as soon as it's over, whether it's a performance, a sporting event, anything at all, when it's over, you leave. But back in the 20s, people were encouraged to stay, and they'd have all sorts of activities, whether it was Halloween parties or weekly bridge tournaments or bird shows, things that might have to do with whatever was going on the screen or the stage. But today, again, not too many people come down here unless they need to use the bathroom. And that's when we decided to start to capitalize and use this space a bit more. And we're building something that we call the Folk Americana Roots Hall of Fame, which is a lot of words, might not mean as much to some people. So we have decided to shorten it to just Farhoff. And what Farhoff is it's a celebration of music, local music, music from around the globe, but how music ties us all together as a culture and what music means. When people think about music, you don't necessarily think about Boston as a music city. You might think of Nashville or New York, Detroit, but Boston is absolutely a music city. There are musicians that started here. The Puritans, the Pilgrims, they had music hundreds of years ago. Native Americans had music as their own form of expression. The very first book ever published in the colonies was a book of religious hymns, and that was done in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So there is so much music history right here in this area throughout New England, and we want to try and show that and celebrate that. And so we're building a Hall of Fame, a museum of sorts, that our goal is to have that right here. So if there's a day where there isn't a performance going on, someone can still come into Boston and see and experience some of our history in this building and music history throughout. One of the exhibits is right behind me here. These are a series of sculptures. They are all done by the same artist based in Tennessee. His name is Alan LaQuire, and they're sculptures of musicians from the civil rights era. He calls this cultural heroes. And these are all men and women that use their music to talk about civil rights and human rights. And some of them are jazz, some of them are blues, country, classic music. But what they were trying to share with their music, and the stories they were trying to tell with their music is what ties them together. And that's really a concept that we're trying to show and express through this initiative, is that it doesn't matter if you're a blues, a jazz, a hip hop, a country music artist, rock and roll. You might be trying to tell the story as somebody else, and there are some very amazing stories that are being told. I'm going to give you a closer look at some of these. These are all clay, and they're larger than life heads, and they're pretty remarkable. So this one here, oops. So we have Bessie Smith here. You can, we've got Woody Guthrie behind me. Lead Belly here. We're gonna go backstage as well, and that it can be a little spotty, so you might lose me when we're back there, but I'm here. This one here is Josh White. You can see how large these are. They all are done to show emotion, try and make the artist look like they're singing, and they're all done with different ways of molding with clay as well. Some smooth, some a bit rough. This one here is Paul Robeson. This is one of the more captivating ones, I think. It's all like a mosaic of clay. But we're gonna go backstage. First thing I want to show you when we're backstage is a space that we call the ice room. Now, if you think back in history, air conditioning didn't always exist, but people's need for comfort has existed for quite some time. And so early on, around the 1800s or so, comfort cooling became a concept. At first, it was usually just for medicine. If you had high fever, you'd use ice to keep your body cold. And Massachusetts being a big shipping and medical area, ice was sent on boats around the world from right here in Boston. Well, eventually they started to just use it for your own comfort. And what they would do is they would get ice delivered to theaters and buildings like this one. They'd have it stored somewhere backstage. There'd be fans. If you had a fan nearby, it could blow the cold air from the ice as the ice melted, and it would create air conditioning. Today, there's a much more modern way that people use air conditioning, but we actually still use ice. It's a much more modern take on it, but we have 18 chillers that keep water extremely cold in the middle of the night when utility costs are low. And then during the day, when the building heats up, all of that cold water gets pumped through the pipes down the hallway to 3 giant fans that blow all that cold air throughout the building. And it's energy efficient. It works pretty well for us. Something that is an adaptation of what would have been here almost 100 years ago. So I'm going to give you a quick peek at that as we head backstage. Door here, you'll see inside that room. So that's our chiller room. So each one of those tanks is a ice machine that creates cold water and filters it throughout the entire building. Keeps us cold in the summer. Keeps me cold year round. My office is right next door to it. There's some narrow hallways back here. Bear with me if it's a little bumpy. So the first thing I'm going to show you back here is this hallway behind me, which are our 11 dressing rooms. All pretty much the same, all original to the building, really. One of the first things that I hear from people is, oh, wow, that's it? They're not super exciting. They don't have to be. We're an old historic theater. A lot of artists, when they come, they know what to expect. I think I have a few pictures that I can show of that over the years. Everyone in the industry has what is known as a rider, and it's more or less your list of requirements or demands, needs per se. So I'm going to share my screen again. And so we can do different things based on what a rider might be. Sometimes it's, I only want Coca-Cola or Pepsi. Sometimes it's a bit more extreme. You can see this picture here on the left. We have the band Boston in one of the dressing rooms before a show in 1976. And the dressing room that I'm going to show you, I'm almost certain is the one that's in the picture. I haven't gotten any proof. I have to talk to the photographer, but I'm pretty sure that it's the one that's in the picture. But here's just some looks at what some of them might look like. This is backstage for hair and makeup during a performance a few years ago. Some of the smaller dressing rooms might be just an individual's dressing room. The one at the end of the hallway is our choral dressing room. That's where you can fit 50, 60 dancers all in one room together. During a concert or a comedy show, since that's the largest room, that's usually where the main act would be. So things can be a little different based on what's going on. And we can bring in furniture that an artist might need. For sake of example, Patti LaBelle had a Valentine's Day themed room, and we had red furniture throughout the room. Some artists are a bit more needy in their requirements and might have a few more requests than others. We've got a ballerina backstage here. We have the Cowardly Lion showing off his outfit before a show a few years back. And some of the more extreme stories I've heard, we've got the artist Yul Brynner, who was famous as the King in The King and I. And it said that one performance he was here, he actually requested that his dressing room be repainted. He didn't like the color that it was, and it had to be repainted 3 times until it was the proper shade of brown for him. Another artist in more recent history, Barry Manilow, was here a number of times in the 90s, and he actually is very superstitious. He doesn't like people talking to him, looking at him backstage. So we actually had to cover the hallway here from his dressing room to the stage with black curtains like this, so that he could walk from his dressing room to the stage in complete darkness, not have to talk to anybody before the show. The first people he would see and communicate with would have been the audience when he made it to the stage. But let me pop open one of these dressing rooms, give you a peek, and then we're gonna make our way up towards the stage, which is one of the biggest in the US. So this is one of the smaller dressing rooms. Behind that door would be a bathroom, and then you've got your own little makeup space. For a Broadway show, this is where one of the main actors would be, one of the lead performers. For a concert or something else, this may or may not be used based on how big the concert is. But again, they're relatively simple, but they can get more decorated based on what the show is and what their needs might be. Now, it's become tradition in recent history for a lot of touring acts to sign their names to the wall, literally leave their mark here in the building. And we'll see a few of them as we walk down the hallway here. We've got a lot of kids shows and family shows, PJ Masks. This is the Grinch. We do a lot during the holiday season. Rock of Ages here. And so if it's a big touring Broadway style show, they'll actually do some sort of art piece, have the entire cast and crew sign their name around it. The Sound of Music. This is Annie. Sometimes they get creative. This is Certificate of Adoption for Annie in 2017. And as this became increasingly popular, we decided to put in temporary walls where individuals can come, sign their name, and then if the wall is completely filled, we can then remove it, put it on display somewhere else, preserve it, do whatever we need to do, and then put a new blank wall here. It's hard to see some of these up close, so I have a few more images I'll show you of some of the bigger names, and then we're going to make our way up to the stage. So let's see. So that's the wall I'm in front of here. We have Jerry Seinfeld signed this wall, Chelsea Handler, a late night show host, Janet Jackson. Up in the top right corner in green is Sheryl Crow, local comedian and late night show host. Bottom right is Conan O'Brien. Neil Young, I showed his picture before. He actually drew himself and then signed his name back in 2011. John Mellencamp on the right there. As I said, we do a lot of Christmas, a lot of holiday shows. One of the most recent performances was celebrity chef Alton Brown on the right there. He did a cooking and variety show. Steely Dan, you'll see on the left. Alvin Ailey danced. We have almost every year. One of the most interesting ones is this one on the bottom right in green. We've had everything from dancers to musicians to actors, comedians, and even religious leaders. So that bottom right green is the Dalai Lama, who was in Boston a few years ago. And we invited him to our theater, brought him around. He thought that this was a very interesting initiative and wanted to have his name be a part of the wall as well. So stick with me as we go down this hallway. I might freeze up on you once or twice. This is where the least service is that I have. But we're going to make our way to the stage. It's a long walk for performers sometimes to get from their dressing rooms all the way up to the stage. We're going to head up some stairs. At the top of the stairs is the stage door. And that's where all the actors, actresses, staff, stage crew, etc. will enter the building. So that door behind me is the stage door. Leads out to the street. Everybody enters the building, checks in with security, and then eventually heads up to the stage. I'm gonna highlight my second camera. So the stage itself underneath us is designed for dancers. There are pockets of air and padding, makes it a little lighter on your legs, on your knees, so you can jump, you can spin, you can do all sorts of tricks on the stage. The stage actually used to be a lot smaller than it is today. And it got to a point in time in the 60s and 70s where some of the big touring ballets and Broadway shows didn't want to visit Boston anymore. You can actually see on the left here where the brick stops and the concrete starts. That brick is the original building, and the concrete around us is everything new as of 1980. And the stage is only about 25 feet deep as well. It would have stopped around here. And it wasn't really the best for 100 dancers, a large group. They actually had something that they called catchers, where if there was someone within the show, a ballet, that would jump across the stage, there'd be somebody there standing off stage to catch you, to make sure you didn't go crashing into the wall. That's how small things were backstage. They also didn't have a lot of space for scenery. They had to keep things outside. So if it was during the winter and there was snow, or if there was rain, it was just very complicated. And so a lot of those touring acts said, we're not coming back to Boston until you fix what you have going on here. And so the group at the time that ran the theater before Dr. Wang came around raised about $5 million to build the stage to what it is today. Goes over 100 feet to the back wall. The proscenium, the archway behind me, where the stage is over 90 feet wide. There's an additional 45 feet of space on the wings. And today it is one of the biggest stages in the US. But they didn't take any of their time or money to invest in the infrastructure. And so as the 80s progressed, that's when things started to fall apart. Even though it was a great big stage, they didn't fix all of the art and the sculptures and other things that started to fall apart. And so that's when Dr. Wang got involved in the mid 80s. And when Dr. Wang got involved, as I said before, this really became the place for a lot of the big touring Broadway shows. And I have some photos here that I'll show you. Though one of the big ones that we've had recurring is the Radio City Rockettes come every few years. And they've been very involved with us with our community outreach. You'll see in the picture on the right, them working with Girl Scouts, doing a little dance routine backstage, working with local dance schools. Some of their shows, they'll bring an entire zoo. You can see the picture on the left. They even worked with us to get members of the Marines to come. We closed off the streets. They all marched down the street together. The Rockettes are dressed up as toy soldiers, the Marines at their side. So we'll have big events going on before shows, ways to increase excitement and information about our shows. We've got The Grinch there with Cindy Lou Who on the left. We've had a show where Annie and Daddy Warbucks roll up in a town car and sign autographs before the performance even begins. Oh. And then the play is kind of a retelling of their story. We've made it snow inside the building. We've had ultimate fighting and boxing and ice skating. I think this is Dorothy Hamill, I believe, if I'm correct. Ice skating on our stage. And really that all started with Phantom of the Opera. Phantom was really our first big soiree, big attempt at doing something different. We became a Phantom Theater where they added additional supports so that in the ceiling, we could have a custom made chandelier, which you'll see in that photo on the left. And that chandelier would swing on a pendulum over audience members' heads, make you feel like you were a part of the performance going on. And then tickets sold out for all those shows, lines around the block. That was really one of the first massive shows we had done. And it was extremely successful, continued to come back. A few years later, we had Miss Saigon. We have had Les Miserables, but Miss Saigon came back. And one of the big things in Miss Saigon is a helicopter. And we got a full-scale 1,000-pound helicopter to come down from the rafters. Its propellers would spin. If you were sitting in the first few rows, you would feel the gust of wind from those propellers. So again, really audience involvement, making this a one-of-a-kind place for performance has always been the goal in the recent history, making this a never forgettable entertainment experience, no matter what you're coming to see. Now, of course, COVID hit us in 2020. We shut down in March of 2020. Hundreds of employees, from full-time staff like myself, as well as security guards, ushers, ticket takers, were laid off with no end in sight of when we might be able to reopen. And fortunately for us, we were able to get some additional funding and assistance to be able to reopen. We had to make some modifications, some modernizations as well to the building, adding touchless hand sanitizers, touchless water in the bathrooms, bringing this almost 100-year-old theater into the 21st century. We also added a system called Active Pure technology, which is NASA designed technology that filters the air, sends molecules that kills bacteria and viruses, the COVID virus included. And so we've done a lot to be able to reopen. We reopened our doors successfully in August of 2021. And it's been a very exciting time for us ever since, with continuing to see how we can evolve and stay, like I said, at the forefront of everything. During that time, this light behind me became much more of a symbol than it's ever been before. If you've watched on the Worcester Public cable, you might have seen something, the Ghost Light series. And that was a program that we started when we were closed to show the impact COVID had on the arts, where our capacity in this building, 3,000 seats, throughout all of 2020 and much of 2021, our max capacity here was about 10 people. And that was all we had. We had to limit the number of staff we could have in the building. If we did a show, it could only be to 10 people. And so what we did is we had our own show called the Ghost Light series, where it was an artist, completely unplugged, no lighting, no sound outside of this ghost light, and myself running the camera. And we recorded a number of shows live here on this stage that went on local cable stations, NBC, and a number of different places to show really the impact of COVID on the arts. Fortunately for us, we were able to raise some awareness, let people know we're still around. This is only an intermission, as we called it. And like I said, we were able to happily and successfully reopen last August. But this light is a part of theater history. And it goes back generations. Every stage in the world should have one of these. Nobody really knows when or why exactly it started. But because people in the arts are extremely superstitious, there are all sorts of stories around the ghost light and what it is and why it's there. A lot of people believe that every theater is haunted. And so you want to keep the ghosts happy. And in order to keep the ghosts happy, you have a light on at all times when all the other lights are off. So as soon as a performance ends and all the lights go off in the house, one member of our stage crew walks to center stage and puts that light down center stage and turns all the other lights off. The real reason for having a light there center stage is safety. If all the other lights are off and there is a staff member here late at night, they know where the stage ends and you don't fall off the stage. So that's really the main reason for having it. But like I said, people in the arts are extremely superstitious and have created all sorts of fun stories around the ghost light. And we, like I said, also started to create our own, doing that concert series right with that ghost light to give it its own new meaning for us. There were social media accounts and all sorts of theaters and Broadway. They would take pictures of their ghost light to, again, show that this was just an intermission. We would be back someday and better than ever, stronger than ever before. And knock on wood, that has happened, and the arts will continue to thrive and grow. But that's my last little anecdote. Hope I gave you some memories, helped you learn a little bit more about the history of this place. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them before we say goodbye about anything at all.
Very enjoyable presentation.
I'm
Excellent
glad.
presentation.
Absolutely,
Thank you
very
very much.
informative.
Oh, I think it's worth doing again.
I'm so surprised that it's the largest stage in the United States. That's incredible. One of them?
One of.
One of?
We,
Okay.
I like to use those clarifying words. One of.
One of. Okay.
We like to say we're in the top 5 as far as size. Nobody really measures their stage, so it's hard to tell where things compare. Mostly it's the seating capacity the places are concerned with. So as far as seats are concerned, we're in the top 20. When it comes to stage, there are all sorts of different factors. Well, is it the stage? Is it the wings? What considers part of the stage? There are only a handful that we know of that are bigger than us. So we like to say we're one of the largest in the US.
Well, from everyone to Bruce Springsteen to the Dalai Lama. Wow,
Exactly.
We are so lucky to have this beautiful building in Boston. And stay tuned, everyone, to our Ghost Flight series, brought to you by Scott and the Wang Boch Center. We'll have 2 more shows, one in March and April. And again, Scott, thank you so much. This is wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you for coordinating,
Scott.
and hopefully we can all meet again.